Right, listen up because this is a story about a man, a small man actually, but with a big hat. A hat so big it became a symbol of his larger-than-life persona. This man, despite his stature, would go on to leave an indelible mark on history. I'm talking about Napoleon Bonaparte, and no, he wasn't French. Well, not originally. He was born on a Mediterranean island that had its own unique culture and history. He was born on Corsica, an island more Italian than baguettes and berets. Corsica had only recently been acquired by France, and its people were still very much Italian in spirit and culture. Imagine Napoleon as a young lad kicking rocks, not happy about being ruled by the French. He grew up in a modest household, surrounded by the rugged beauty of Corsican landscapes and the strong-willed Corsican people. Napoleon wasn't born with a silver spoon, more like a rusty spork. His family was of minor nobility, but they were far from wealthy. They lived a simple life, filled with the challenges and hardships of the time. His family wasn't rich, but they managed to get him into military school. This was a significant opportunity, one that would set the course for his future. Military school was where young Napoleon began to shine. Turns out little Napoleon was a bright lad, especially when it came to blowing things up. He excelled in his studies, particularly in mathematics and artillery, subjects that would prove crucial in his later military career. He loved cannons, tactics, the whole military shebang. His passion for military strategy and his keen intellect set him apart from his peers. He was a natural leader, even at a young age. He devoured books on warfare like they were going out of fashion, which they kind of were, what with him inventing new ways to fight wars and all. His voracious appetite for knowledge and his innovative thinking would become hallmarks of his military genius. This was the making of the man who'd one day make all of Europe tremble. His early experiences, his education, and his relentless drive were all shaping him into the formidable leader he would become. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's focus on the young Napoleon, the ambitious Corsican who was ready to take on the world. For now, just picture him, the short, ambitious Corsican, ready to take on the world. His journey was just beginning, and the world had no idea what was coming. France was in a right mess. The French Revolution had turned the country upside down, leaving it in a state of chaos and uncertainty. Revolutionaries had chopped off the king's head, which, let's be honest, is a bit much. The execution of Louis XVI sent shockwaves through Europe, and the power vacuum it created led to even more turmoil. Everyone was fighting everyone else, and the whole country was about as stable as a one-wheeled bicycle. Factions vied for control, and civil unrest was rampant, making daily life a struggle for ordinary citizens. This, my friends, was Napoleon's chance. Amidst the chaos, a young and ambitious Napoleon Bonaparte saw an opportunity to rise to power. He was a brilliant artillery officer, knew his cannons like the back of his hand. His military prowess and strategic mind set him apart from his peers. At the siege of Toulon, he blasted the bejeebers out of the British, and suddenly everyone knew his name. His decisive actions and leadership during the siege earned him recognition and respect. He rose through the ranks faster than a Ferrari on a racetrack. His rapid ascent in the military was nothing short of meteoric, as he quickly gained the trust and admiration of his superiors. From then on, it was one victory after another. Italy, Egypt, he conquered them all, spreading the revolution like it was a particularly catchy tune. His campaigns were marked by brilliant tactics and relentless determination. He conquered them all, spreading the revolution like it was a particularly catchy tune. His victories not only expanded French territory but also spread revolutionary ideals across Europe. He was a master strategist, a charismatic leader, and frankly the other generals were about as useful as a chocolate teapot. His ability to inspire his troops and outmaneuver his enemies made him a formidable force on the battlefield. By the time he got back to Paris, he was a hero. The people of France saw him as a savior, someone who could bring stability and glory to their troubled nation. The French love a winner, and Napoleon, well, he was winning big time. His popularity soared, and he became a symbol of hope and strength for the French people. Now, Napoleon wasn't stupid. He knew how fickle the French could be. One minute they're baking you a cake, the next they're sharpening the guillotine. So he played his cards right. He staged a coup, declared himself first consul, basically the top dog in charge. But Napoleon wasn't content with just being top dog. He wanted the whole kennel. So in 1804, he did what any self-respecting dictator would do. He crowned himself Emperor of the French. Not bad for a lad from Corsica, eh? Of course, he let the Pope come along for show, but at the last minute Napoleon took the crown and plonked it on his own head. The message was clear. I'm in charge here, and don't you forget it. France had a new emperor, and Europe, well, they were about to meet their match. Napoleon wasn't just about winning battles, although he was rather good at that. He wanted to leave his mark on France, to be remembered as more than just a conqueror. So he created the Napoleonic Code, a set of laws that were revolutionary, literally. This code swept away the old feudal system, the one where peasants were treated worse than donkeys. It established equality before the law, religious tolerance, and the right to property. It wasn't perfect, mind you, especially if you were a woman, but it was a darn sight better than what they had before. The Napoleonic Code became the model for legal systems all over Europe. It's still the basis for law in many countries today. So, next time you're in court, you can thank Napoleon for that, or blame him, depending on which side of the law you're on. Section 5. From pyramids to Austerlitz, a continent at his feet. Napoleon's armies were like a well-oiled machine, conquering everything in sight. He fought battles all over Europe, from the scorching deserts of Egypt to the freezing plains of Russia. And, well, he usually won. Take the Battle of Austerlitz, for example. It was a tactical masterpiece. Napoleon outsmarted the Austrians and Russians, crushing their armies and cementing his reputation as a military genius. He wasn't just about brute force, though. Napoleon knew how to use propaganda, how to build his image. He even brought along scholars to Egypt to study the pyramids. Talk about a PR stunt. For a while it seemed like Napoleon was unstoppable. He was the master of Europe, the new Caesar, and everyone else was just along for the ride. Section 6. The Empire Unraveling, Spanish Ulcer and Russian Winter. But even Napoleon, the military genius who had conquered much of Europe, couldn't win them all. His first major blunder was trying to conquer Spain, a nation with a fierce spirit and a will to resist. The Spanish, they weren't too keen on being conquered. They had a deep sense of national pride and a strong desire for independence. They fought back with a vengeance, dragging Napoleon into a messy guerrilla war that drained his resources and his patience. The rugged terrain and the hit-and-run tactics of the Spanish guerrillas made it a nightmare for the French troops. Then came Russia, the big one. Napoleon, confident in his previous successes, decided to invade Russia with the largest army Europe had ever seen. Napoleon decided to invade Russia with the largest army Europe had ever seen. Big mistake. The sheer size of the country and the harshness of its climate were underestimated. The Russians just retreated, burning everything as they went. This scorched earth policy left the French with no supplies, no shelter, and no way to sustain their massive army. It was like trying to conquer a giant bonfire. The French troops were left hungry, cold, and demoralized as they marched deeper into the desolate Russian landscape. By the time Napoleon reached Moscow, it was a smouldering ruin. The city had been set ablaze by the retreating Russians, leaving nothing for the French to capture or use. And then the Russian winter hit. The temperatures plummeted, and the French soldiers, ill-prepared for such extreme cold, began to suffer terribly. It was colder than a polar bear's nose, and Napoleon's army was decimated. Frostbite, starvation, and exhaustion took a heavy toll. The retreat from Russia was a disaster, a long, frozen march of death. Thousands of soldiers perished in the unforgiving winter, and the once mighty Grande Armée was reduced to a shadow of its former self. Napoleon had finally met his match, and it was Mother Nature herself. The combination of the Russian tactics and the brutal winter had brought the great conqueror to his knees. Section 7, Waterloo Sunset, the final act. After the Russian debacle, Napoleon's enemies sensed blood. They ganged up on him, eager for a piece of the fallen emperor. Napoleon, never one to back down, raised another army and went out in a blaze of glory, or at least he tried to. Waterloo, that's where it all ended. It was a muddy, bloody mess. Napoleon fought like a lion, but it wasn't enough. The British, under the Duke of Wellington, and the Prussians, they were too strong. Napoleon was defeated, his empire crumbling around him. It was a sad end for a man who had once ruled most of Europe. The emperor was dethroned, his dreams of a French empire dashed on the battlefield. He was exiled to a tiny island in the middle of nowhere, left to contemplate what might have been. Section 8. Exile and Echoes, St. Helena and Beyond. Imagine Napoleon stuck on this rock in the South Atlantic, St. Helena. It was about as glamorous as a wet weekend in Scunthorpe. No more grand armies, no more thundering cannons, just endless days staring out at the ocean. But even in exile, Napoleon remained a legend. He wrote his memoirs, dictating his version of history. He became a romantic figure, the fallen hero, even a martyr to some. He died on that island in 1821 at the age of 51. Some say it was poisoning, others say it was cancer. Whatever the cause, the world mourned the loss of one of history's most fascinating figures. Section 9. The Napoleonic Myth, Legacy of a Legend. Napoleon's legacy is a complicated one. He was a brilliant military strategist, a ruthless dictator, a reformer, and a tyrant, all rolled into one. He spread the ideals of the French Revolution, but he also crushed those who opposed him. He left a lasting mark on France and on Europe. His legal code, his military reforms, his very image, they all shaped the world we live in today. Love him or hate him, you can't deny that Napoleon Bonaparte was one of the most extraordinary figures in history. He was a man of contradictions, a complex and fascinating character who continues to intrigue and inspire us centuries later. And that's what makes his story so compelling. He was the right character, that Napoleon. Section 10. The Aftermath of Napoleon's Reign. Gap to S. After Napoleon's defeat and subsequent exile, Europe was left to pick up the pieces of a continent ravaged by years of war and upheaval. The political and social landscape had been irreversibly altered by his campaigns and reforms. The Congress of Vienna, held from 1814 to 1815, was a monumental effort to restore stability and order to Europe. Gap 2S, led by the major powers of the time, Austria, Britain, Russia, and Prussia, the Congress sought to redraw the continent's borders and establish a balance of power that would prevent any single nation from dominating Europe as Napoleon had done. The map of Europe was redrawn, with old monarchies restored and new alliances forged. Gap 2S. The Congress of Vienna also aimed to suppress the revolutionary ideals that Napoleon had spread. A new conservative order was established, prioritizing the maintenance of traditional power structures and the suppression of nationalist and liberal movements. However, the seeds of change had already been sown, and the social and political reforms initiated by Napoleon continued to influence European societies. Gap 2S. The impact of the Congress of Vienna was profound and long-lasting. It established a framework for international diplomacy that persisted throughout the 19th century and laid the groundwork for the modern nation-state system. While it sought to turn back the clock on the revolutionary changes, it ultimately couldn't erase the desire for liberty and equality that had been ignited. Gap 2S. In the end, the aftermath of Napoleon's reign was a complex mix of restoration and change. The Congress of Vienna may have ended the Napoleonic Wars, but the echoes of his influence continued to resonate through the corridors of power, shaping the Europe we know today. Gap 2S. And so, the story of Napoleon Bonaparte doesn't end with his exile to St. Helena. It continues in the lasting impact of his actions, the reshaped map of Europe, and the enduring questions about power, ambition, and legacy. His reign may have ended, but the narrative of his influence is still being written. Gap 2S. Napoleon's story is a testament to the power of one individual to change the course of history, for better or worse. And as we look back on his life and legacy, we are reminded of the delicate balance between ambition and restraint, between revolution and order. Napoleon Bonaparte, even in defeat, remains a towering figure in the annals of history. Gap 2S. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more fascinating historical content. Gap 2S. Until next time, keep exploring the past to understand the present.